said, "The sea has always been more than a map of coastlines." Listen to that for a moment. The blue on a chart is not blank space. Listen to that for a moment. The blue on a chart is not blank space. It is infrastructure, arteries of trade and diplomacy, lanes where energy, goods, and people move, and where the movements of ships and aircraft become a language as consequential as any speech in a capital. Over the last few weeks, that language has grown louder across the Indo Pacific. What used to be routine transits and training sorties have become signals read and answered not only by navies and ministries, but by markets, port managers, and families who track the headlines. Two events in April tightened the grammar. On April 20th, 2026, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense released imagery in a short statement saying the Chinese aircraft carrier Liaoning had transited the Taiwan Strait. On the same day, Manila and Washington formally opened Exercise Balikatan, the annual U.S. Philippine War Games, an iteration officials described as the most expansive in its history, involving roughly 17,000 personnel and 4 participants from the Philippines, the United States, Japan, Australia, Canada, France, and New Zealand. For the first time in recent memory, Japan deployed combat troops to the Philippines under newly active reciprocal access arrangements, sending forces intended to test interoperability across a wider set of missions than past exercises. Those 2 moves, a carrier passage and a large multinational drill, did more than occupy neighbouring waters. They compressed message and optics. A carrier transit demonstrates reach and the capacity to sustain operations. Far from home, large multinational exercises show capacity and commitment in a different register. From Beijing's vantage, Liaoning's passage and nearby manoeuvres were framed as routine training. Sea-air coordination, live fire, shooting, rapid maneuvering and underway replenishment, all aimed at preparing forces for integrated operations from other capitals TED-free. These same activities can look very different. Tokyo notes sensitivity when ships approach small islands in strategic corridors. Taipei and Washington underline the long practice of treating the Taiwan Strait as international waters. Manila watches for anything that might threaten Philippine sovereign rights and sea lines of communication. That difference in reading is the hinge between reassurance and alarm. One country's freedom of navigation operation is another's deliberate intrusion. One country's routine training is another's calibrated coercion. The translation depends on history, law, and the political audience's leaders must answer to at home. In the days after April 20, Beijing's activity did not stop with a single carrier transit. The People's Liberation Army Southern Theatre Command announced additional exercises in waters east of Luzon, organizing a surface action group that Chinese state reporting and imagery identified with the designation used in their releases, and that observers elsewhere refer to as Task Force 107. Open imagery and defense reporting showed large surface formations that included at least one Type 055 guided missile destroyer, a platform many analysts treat as emblematic of China's growing surface fleet and long-range anti-access capabilities. For Washington and Manila, Balikatan's expansion was deliberate and public. For the first time in the exercise's modern history, partner states fielded officers and units in roles designed to test amphibious operations, naval interdiction, air defense, and integrated multi-domain maneuvers that stretched to northern Luzon and waters abutting both the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. The stated aim, repeatedly emphasized in Manila and Allied statements, was deterrence through readiness, a visible demonstration that allies can operate together and that the Philippines' sovereignty and maritime rights can be defended. Beijing, for its part, cast a multinational drill staged near Maritime Sea. Revisit considers strategically sensitive as a provocative external encroachment rather than reassurance. Public statements from both sides were pitched as much to domestic audiences as to foreign capitals. The practical consequences of that public signaling are immediate and at times mundane. Merchant ships do not pass political motive. They read risk assessments. When navies flex, insurers and shippers update their calculations. Temporary safety zones and exclusion areas can force route changes, shift port calls, and push up freight premiums. A week of tense maneuvering can affect transit times, alter factory schedules, and ripple into commodity markets. Local fishermen change where they set nets, coastal towns follow the news. A temporary exclusion zone patched on an electronic chart can feel like a fault line to a logistics manager responsible for timetables and margins. At the operational level, the risk of miscalculation is not an abstraction. Modern sensors, long-range weapons, and network command systems compress timelines for decision and increase the chance that an unintended event, a radar lock, a near miss, a disabled navigation light, becomes something far worse. That's why experienced military planners and diplomats insist on two pragmatic tracks working in parallel: deterrence and dialogue. Deterrence establishes credible capacity and resolve. Dialogue reduces the odds that routine encounters escalate. The two are complementary. They require investment and disciplined practice. Across the region, there are practical tools that reduce risk. Pre-exercise notifications and training calendars shared well in advance give commercial stakeholders time to plan. Naval hotlines and standard procedures for conduct at sea. Think of them as traffic laws for crowded waters. Limit improvisation when vessels converge. Rehearsing incident investigations and agreeing on basic protocols to examine a ship or aircraft encounter help distinguish accidents from delib. Orate acts, where communication channels are robust, where navies practice routine deconfliction and commanders have tested hotlines. Incidents are more likely to be resolved quickly. Where they are weak, domestic politics can hamstring military-to-military contacts and slow the response when minutes matter. Smaller measures can have outsized effects. Routine exercise notifications reduce surprise. Standardized incident at sea procedures reduce the need for ad hoc judgment calls during a tense encounter, including deconfliction and investigation drills inside ordinary exercises, creates shared habits under stress. When trust is thin, multilateral forums and third-party mediators can help test confidence-building measures, incrementally building a record of predictable behavior that can be drawn on when tensions spike. Policy choices are political and domestic. Leaders must justify preparedness to voters while avoiding rhetoric that closes off restraint. Hard statements can shore up support at home, but they can also narrow policy options with rivals. Savvy public communications can reassure without demonizing neighbors. That balance matters because strategic competition will not vanish, it must be managed. The more regimes institutionalize predictable patterns of behavior, the less likely a dangerous encounter becomes the opening act of a crisis. The economic consequences are real and immediate. For shipping companies, predictable notice of exercises and clear exclusion zone boundaries trim fuel and time costs. For port operators, revised berth windows and contingency plans smooth operations. For insurers and logistics managers, transparent communication lowers premiums and reduces costly routing. In an interconnected economy, even a short disruption at sea can cascade into factory slowdowns and price shifts on store shelves. The stakes for commerce are therefore as immediate as the stakes for strategy. There is also a human dimension. Coastal communities, mariners and sailors live with uncertainty in their daily rhythms. For them, predictability is not an abstract policy goal. It is safety, livelihoods, and calendars. When drills are announced well in advance and when navies behave professionally in encounters, merchant crews, fishers, and port workers can plan. When messages are inconsistent or escalation is implied in tone, families feel the stress. The technical details analysts debate, ship classes, sortie patterns, missile types, matter because they shape impressions of capability and intent. The presence of a Type 055 destroyer in a squadron is read differently than a small patrol boat. A carrier strike group cruising a corridor tests surveillance and response in a way that attracts immediate attention and instantly becomes a public image. Yet capability is only half of the picture, interpretation is the other. The same set of movements can be decoded as reassurance or as escalation, depending on the viewer. That interpretive gap, say central risk. It is compounded by the reality that different capitals use different legal and political frameworks. Washington, Taipei, and many maritime states treat key straits and passages as international waters under long-standing practices. Beijing frames nearby maneuvers and areas through a different set of claims and narratives. Those mismatched frameworks produce asymmetric responses and create fertile ground for misunderstanding. So what should leaders and militaries do in the near term? There is no silver bullet, but a set of modest, concrete steps can change outcomes. First, expand and standardize notifications, share exercise plans with neighboring states in sufficient time to allow commercial stakeholders and local governments to plan. Second, institutionalize incident at sea procedures across bilateral and multilateral exercises so that responses follow pre-agreed rules rather than improvisation. Third, invest in and rehearse hotlines between operational commanders, not only diplomats, so an accidental radar lock can be checked and explained in minutes. Fourth, bake the confliction and investigation drills into routine training so shared habits form under stress. There is also a policy imperative. Strong defense postures and credible deterrence must be matched by sustained diplomatic engagement. A two-track approach. Deterrence and dialogue is not a compromise of principles. It is a practical way to keep options open when crises test resolve. Political leaders must be able to reassure domestic audiences without locking themselves into reflexive escalation. That takes deliberate, measured rhetoric and an emphasis on transparency where feasible. For navies and coast guards, professionalism matters more than rhetoric. Discipline and encounters at sea, clear rules of engagement and a strong ethic of incident reporting limit the chance that an error becomes a flashpoint. For diplomats, keeping political channels open during tense moments is essential. And for commercial stakeholders, shippers, port authorities, and insurers, investing in contingency planning and updated navigational intelligence is the pragmatic response to an uncertain operational environment. He said, one nation's freedom of navigation operation is another's deliberate intrusion. That line captures the essential misalignment, the different vantage points that turn the same set of actions into opposite narratives. It points to a practical truth. Managing competition well is a matter of process and repetition, not a single grand bargain. Small, verifiable steps, shared exercise calendars, agreed procedures for close encounters, joint investigation protocols, reduce uncertainty, investigation protocols. They do not erase rivalry, but they lower the odds that a routine day at sea becomes a spiral into crisis. There is another truth. The stakes are economic as well as strategic. A week of tense maneuvers affects shipping schedules, insurance costs, and commodity markets. A patter. North of risky signaling raises the cost of trade and the burden on families living by the water. Conversely, predictable, rule-governed competition preserves commerce and livelihoods. He said, there is no inevitability that tensions will become conflict. That is not optimism for its own sake. It is a reminder that choices matter. Professional sailors, disciplined rules of engagement, tested hotlines and leaders who can couple deterrence with dialogue. These are the ingredients that make a different outcome possible. The region's future is not written in the tracks on a nautical chart. It is shaped by the institutions and habits we build to manage encounters at sea, and finally grounding those abstract choices in the daily reality of governance and navigation matters. He said, asterisks, the hands that steer policy ashore hold comms, frequencies for those at sea, cap tivif, ensa, x asterisk, cetrix. If those hands use those frequencies to close misperception gaps, to explain an unexpected radar contact, to commit to a transparent investigation after an incident, the pattern of activity at sea can become stable competition rather than a risky language of brinkmanship. If they do not, each sortie and replenishment becomes an increment of uncertainty. The coming weeks and months will not be quiet. Carriers will transit, task groups will maneuver, and exercises will proceed, markets will track shipping notices, and insurers will update risk assessments. The signal will be read in capitals and in coastal towns. What matters now is how leaders, diplomats, and militaries respond, whether they choose the hard work of building routines, hotlines, and shared procedures to reduce the chance that a dangerous encounter turns into tragedy. The reward for getting that balance right is profound. A region where trade flows reliably, coastal livelihoods endure, and strategic competition is managed with restraint rather than surrendered to accident. The responsibility to keep the seas a conduit for prosperity rests where? Multiple hands at sea, in ministries, and in the rooms where policy is made.